Okay, I think here we go. So welcome to everyone to the May edition of the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts reading series. Today, we're thrilled to host Lucy Jane Bledsoe, author of the new novel, No Stopping Us Now, which I highly recommend. And if you look in the program, which I'll put in the chat a little later, there will be many, many links that you can use to buy that book. I'm going to introduce Alta Mesa Center for the Arts and then Lucy. Then we're going to dive right into a book talk and discussion. And we're very happy today also to have Jenith Gearhart with us, who's going to speak to her experience as one of the first athletes to receive a scholarship, female athletes at Stanford University. So Alta Mesa Center for the Arts is an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, substantive and arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. Now, wherever you are on your artistic and your spiritual journey, whoever you are welcome here. It's my pleasure to introduce Lucy Jane Bledsoe, who I met first through her book, The Thin Bright Line. And after I read that book, I did the fangirl thing, and I think I hopped online and I wrote her a fan letter and told her how much I loved the book. And it turned out that Lucy Jane Bledsoe was just down the road in Berkeley. It turned out that Lucy also loved basketball, and I have been a basketball player my entire life. And so that forged over time, a bond that goes beyond literature and goes beyond sports. A little bit of the bio for Lucy. She's the author of this new book, No Stopping Us Now, but she's also tremendously prolific and has received many fellowships and awards, including the Yaddo Fellowship and 2 National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Fellowships. She's won the American Library Association Stonewall Book Award, and her 2018 novel, Evolution of Love, was a finalist for the Frero Gunley Award in Fiction and the Lambda Literary Award. She's the author of earlier collections and, of course, The Thin Bright Line, which I highly recommend. And she's traveled. She's traveled to Antarctica 3 times, twice as a recipient of the National Science Foundation Fellowships. And you'll discover, I think, in the girl that you meet in this book, which is based on Lucy's own experience, the courage, and perhaps naive courage at first, but also the sense of truth and that necessary pursuit of your own potential that drives a lot of athletes and certainly a lot of writers. I think I'll step aside there and let Lucy take over and tell you a little bit about the book. We will discuss some of the things like Title IX, and we would also like, by the end of this hour, for you to step away with some hope going forward after this time of really disheartening developments nationally and internationally, that the job of the artist and the job of the athlete too, perhaps, is to offer hope. So Lucy.
Hello, everyone. I'm so very happy to be here on this Mother's Day. For those of you who celebrate, happy Mother's Day. And thank you so much to Mary for inviting me to do this talk and be a part of this conversation. I enjoy all my conversations with Mary, so I'm looking forward to this one. We decided we'd do a bit of a focus on hope, which I think is really appropriate right now. So I'm looking forward to that part of it. And happy to be here with Jenith too. And thank you to the Ultimates Center for sponsoring this. So what I'm going to do is start out, just maybe spend about 5 minutes talking about this story and how it came about. And then we'll have some conversation, I guess. No Stopping Us Now is an autobiographical novel. And I tend to write from my imagination, totally. I don't write autobiographically very much, but I guess in my later years, I've started to do that more. And this is a story that's based very much on my own story. I don't deviate too much into fiction. I can talk a little later about why I chose to write it as fiction. But when I was 17, I had this big experience, and I've wanted to write about it for all of these years since, but haven't quite known how to write about it. And I finally realized that what I wanted to do is share my 17-year-old story with young adults today, because at the heart of this story was me finding my voice through basketball, basically. So basically, here's what happened. I wanted to play basketball. It's 1974. I have brothers. They've coached me very intensely. I had one brother in particular who probably coached me more than I wanted to be coached, but I'm grateful to him now. And I taught me an absolute love for the game, but there were no teams for girls. There were none in my grade school. There were none in my high school. So when I'm a junior in high school, I'm wanting to play basketball, but all there was tennis, golf, and swimming. So I played tennis. I lettered in tennis, which for those of you who aren't athletes means I don't know, you played a certain amount. I don't remember how you get your letter, but you reach a certain goal, I think number of games played or something like that, to get your letter. So there was this club in my high school called the Letterman's Club. And so since I had my letter, I thought I would be a member of the Letterman's Club. I, of course, knew that there were only boys in the Letterman's Club, but I went to a meeting anyway and said, I'd like to join. I have my letter. And the advisor for the program was a male teacher, and they sat around, the boys in the Letterman's Club and the male teacher discussed whether this would be possible. I think there was I remember quite a bit of discussion. The only argument I really remember is one guy saying, but it's called the Letterman's Club, so we can't do this. The idea of changing the names was impossible. So I went away. I don't think of myself as much of a fighter, but I got called to the vice principal's office shortly after that. And I thought I was in trouble for something. I didn't know what. But in fact, the vice principal said to me, Gloria Steinem's coming to town, and she's going to be speaking at the Civic Auditorium, and she wants a youth representative on stage with her. Will you be that girl? So I said, okay. And I went and I did this event. It was terrifying. This Portland Civic Auditorium holds 3,000 people. And there I was on stage with Gloria Steinem, who is and was back then very, very famous. And I learned, I tell a story in my novel, No Stopping Us Now, that's true about sort of humiliating myself in the beginning of this event. But I eventually woke up and said some things I really wanted to say. And I said, I want to play basketball, but there's no basketball team, and was told, well, that's illegal. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I learned about Title IX, which had been passed just 2 years earlier, which said, as all of you I'm sure know, that any institution receiving federal funding must give equal opportunities to girls and women as it gives to boys and men. So there was a boys basketball team, there had to be a girls basketball team. So it seemed really straightforward to me. There were some older women in the audience who asked if I wanted to help them make that happen. And I said, yeah, sure. And we started testifying down at the legislature in Salem, Oregon, to the lawmakers there, and also to the Portland Public School Board, and speaking. We spoke to quite a few different things, but mainly about the inequities in sports throughout the Portland schools, and in my high school in particular. I had organized a group of girls, and we were playing city. There was a rec league for girls, and our principal had let us use the gym in the mornings from, I think, like 6 to 8. But when the boys showed up and just started crashing the court, we just had to clear off, and the principal wouldn't enforce it. So I've told stories like that. But mainly I said I wanted to play basketball. I was stunned by the blowback. I had no idea. I was, as Mary said, she didn't say I was very naive, but I was very naive. A lot of people have told me after reading this book, gosh, you're courageous. I was not courageous. I just was naive. I thought, there's a law, so all I need to do is go tell the school board that, they're not doing it right yet. But after I did some of that testifying, a lot of paperwork started flying around the city. Letters to the editor of the Oregonian, letters to the Portland Public Schools, from the Portland Public Schools to my principal, from the athletic director at my high school, who felt very defensive, to my principal. And luckily I kept a scrapbook, which helped me write the book. I'll hold up this. It's a 50-year-old scrapbook since Title IX is turning 50 in June. So I kept a lot of this stuff. And I want to just read you a little bit from a couple of the letters that flew around. This was a letter from the athletic director to my principal. See, this is a 50-year-old letter about me and about what I said to the school board. And he wrote, Miss Bledsoe's statement that male athletes are sanctioned and privileged and given exclusive rights to official facilities is totally and unequivocally preposterous and unfounded. Again, all I said was I didn't have a team. So how that's unequivocally and preposterous and unfounded, I don't know. Here's another one. If Miss Bledsoe, another letter, if Miss Bledsoe has any quarrel with the overall athletic program at Wilson High School, it should be directed more toward getting more girls involved and not toward getting the athletic department involved. My question when I went back to the school board was, how do you get more girls involved in programs that do not exist? I'll just read one more. This was the letter that a guy from the Portland Public Schools, he's from the Public Information Department, which I've said before sounds kind of Orwellian to me. And he's writing to my high school principal. And the whole letter is about me, and I'm never called by name. I'm called the girl throughout the whole letter. And his last sentence is, my last suggestion would be that you refute the girl and defend the high school at the next meeting. So here I was, 17 years old, just kind of blown away by how, I've actually for 50 years tried to process the rage that came toward me. That was the paperwork. The worst part was the personal attacks. The boys basketball coach found me in a hall one day and literally pushed me against the wall and told me if I didn't zip it, I'd be sorry. And there were threats by other coaches at the high school. So it got pretty scary. I'm going to leave it there and maybe save some other bits from the story for our conversation, but that sets the scene. A lot happens after that. Some pretty cool stuff happens, but we'll talk about some of that a little later.
I wonder too if you could talk just a little bit about your relationship to the game. I remember that opening passage when you're that very physical response to the chance to just play, to move your body. I wonder if you'd read a little bit of that for a section and speak to that, because you've been a physical person your whole life, and it seems like even in your prose, there's a kinetic quality in which I feel like I too am moving through the space that you're creating on the page.
Just as an aside, Willa Cather once wrote that the 5 senses should be on every single page. And that's been a guide for me, just that kinetic connection I have to storytelling, to put every part, every sense that you have available to you in your body on the page. So yeah, thank you for recognizing that. Let's see. Well, I can, maybe I'll just read a couple paragraphs from the very beginning. So this
That'd
is
be great.
this is she's, and I say she because it is my story, but I have fictionalized it in a number of places. She's playing in the City League. And as I said, they are not City League, Rec League, and they're playing at 6 to 8 a.m. in the high school every morning. So this is the opening few paragraphs. When my alarm goes off at 5:30 a.m., I wake up hugging my basketball. I let my fingers feel the nubbly surface, the indented lines, the comforting roundness. I imagine all of that spinning off my fingers and heading for the hoop. The nearly silent swish of the ball falling through the hoop. Basketball is the correction to all things askew. It's like traveling to the secret universe in the deepest part of myself, where thinking just stops and my muscles and bones and blood take over. It's the one place where I can forget everything else. I'll just stop there. And that's the physical level of what I loved about basketball. But I also love having a team that I think of as a sisterhood. And the idea that you're working with a group of people cooperatively towards a common goal. I just love that about basketball. And usually also it's a diverse group of girls and people who I might not necessarily meet in other parts of my life. So there's just so much about basketball I love, but those are a couple things.
How did that team aspect filter over into your activist activities? Were your teammates eager to help initially, or was this something that they had to be convinced to want?
You know, I honestly didn't feel like these teammates in this rec league were much a part of the activism. In the novel, I drew a few of them in, but when my true story in high school, it was just something I was doing over here. And it felt like there was a pretty big split then. And it's certainly not true now. It's one thing I love about basketball now, but between athletes and more politically minded people, at least at my high school. I love how the WNBA now is so political. And it's really taking on racial justice and gender justice issues.
Yeah, they've just started too. Their first game was what, Friday, I think, was opening
Yep.
season. And sports has long had a tradition of political awareness, going back to the 1964 Olympics, when John Carlos was raised his hand, and a little known female athlete then, Wyonia Tyus, also in her own way protested racial injustice in the US. So it seems like it has been a vehicle throughout. And if you look at the language of Title IX, and I put it in the chat over there, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. It's not explicitly about sports, but why do you think sport became such a vehicle for change, especially in with women's rights?
I think because sports were such a glaring, obvious place. It's a little bit like why gay marriage became such a rallying call for the LGBT community. It was such an easy, obvious thing of one group having some rights and another group not, that were very specific. In my high school, there were, 4 sports that girls could play and 12 that boys could play. It's like, you can count it. It was so evidence-based. So I think that's one reason it started there. I also think I remember speaking to this a lot when I was testifying as a 17-year-old, the values that one gains, the values and the skills that one gains as an athlete go far beyond, how to block out for rebounding, the leadership skills, the skills of working together in a team and in a group. There's all kinds of studies I know that show that women who play team sports do much better in their later lives and careers than people who don't, or, of course, that's a big generalization, but it helps a lot. So I think it was just such a specific evidence-based place where you could point to inequities and start there.
Mm-hmm. Judith points out too, the Title IX was also the Educational Amendment Act of 1972. Sport in school was an obvious disparity. And of course, in this time too, women are gaining things that we take for granted, like the right to have your own credit card if you're a married woman. And
which was like 72 or something that came in. I can't believe how late that was. Yeah.
Really quite late. We do have Jenith Gearhart in the audience, and Jenith was the one of the first. Were you the first generation, Jenith, to get a college scholarship to play sports at Stanford?
So thank you for that information, Lucy. To pick up where she left off, in 1975, I was a freshman in high school, and I played on the boys tennis team, but they had just started girls volleyball and girls basketball. And by 1978, colleges around the country were looking for female athletes because they were starting to, the way I look at it is in 1972, they passed the Educational Amendment Act of 1972. The sporting community was an obvious place for them to start rectifying the situation of inequality. And then that unlocked the door, but no one opened it. Lucy opened it. Lucy said, I want to get in, I want to play. So someone opened the door for me, and then I'm the generation that walked in. So in 1978, schools are starting to be told you have to supply the 3 main tiers of Title IX. And the first one is participation. We need to accommodate all the women who want to play, and you need to do head count sports. For every scholarship you give a male athlete, you need to give one to a female athlete. Of course, that was a, off the charts inequity, but that's where they started. And then they needed to, so up the participation, increase the level of scholarship. So they had to compensate female athletes and give them not equal, but equivalent money, which is a rabbit hole to go down. And the third one, which was really impactful, was the program benefits that athletes get. And so when I was recruited, I had gone on to Billie Jean King had a newsletter that my mom subscribed to. She started the Women's Sport Foundation in 1974. And in that, she was talking about what female athletes, when you start getting recruited, what should you look at? So for me, it was really simple. I would walk in a gym and I would see if volleyball lines were painted on the basketball court. And if they weren't, then I thought volleyball and women's sports is not a big deal for the school. So USC, they would put tape down. UCLA, they would put tape down. University of Oregon, brand new gym, the lines were painted on the court. Stanford, the lines are painted on the court. And to me, that was a symbol of acceptance. And also to Lucy's point about trying to get gym space and trying to get practice space, I didn't realize this until my freshman year at Stanford. We had our fall volleyball season. I went home for the holidays, and all of my friends who I'd been rivals with in high school, we were very tight. We played club together. They represent University of the Pacific, Oregon, Cal, UCLA, University of Hawaii, some pretty good volleyball schools. Nobody had hot water in their locker rooms. We did. Nobody had access to trainers and doctors. We did. And everybody got really bad practice times. If the basketball team wanted to have a shoot around during volleyball season, the guys would flush the women out and they would shoot, and the women would come back at 8 or 9 at night. So I didn't realize that Stanford was actually the anomaly of the group, that they were really trying to treat us equally and give us the same access as everybody else. I just thought, this is what Title IX looks like. Boy, am I lucky. I have good grades and they want me to play. I was recruited to play basketball as well. I love both sports. And I just thought this was normal. And, you know, within 3 months, I realized, wow, this is not normal. And then I was afraid to tell them what we had. We had our own locker room. We had priority practice during season. The guys weren't even allowed in the gym when we were practicing. They couldn't sit in the stands and watch. They couldn't do anything. And I sprained my ankle the same day John Elway sprained his, famous football player, both freshmen. I'm wheeled in a wheelchair. He's wheeled in a wheelchair. The doctor saw me first because I was there first. Same doctor, same x-rays, same therapy. We spent a month in the training room watching all my children, and I was treated the same way that he was, except that I could put my foot in the ice bucket and not take it out, and he was a wimp and would take it out. That was like my little game. I'm going to keep that thing in there. So that's sort of the next thing after Lucy, just trying to find a team to play. Then things really shifted quickly. So your question, Mary, was I the first athlete? There was one scholarship player a year older than me and one scholarship player 2 years older than me. And then my freshman class, they had 9 recruits, but not everybody had full rides. I did, and 2 other women did, and the other people had partial. So there's a completely different vibe in the gym. And just for the volleyball coach, I don't know how aware you are of our connection to beach volleyball, but most of Stanford's team played sand. They played on private beach clubs. My class came in, we were white, freckled, muscular. We were not beach babes at all. We were athletes. And there was a real culture shock moving forward from that point. So it was really apparent to me that I was on the forefront of this shift, and that I should be super grateful for my opportunity. My mom played basketball, Lucy, back in the day, 3 girls on one side, 3 girls to play defense.
Oh yeah. No, that was in my early days. We played that way when I was a
So
kid.
she was the point guard and she got to play on both sides.
Oh, I never heard of the point guard getting to cross over.
Well, this was in Kansas, you know, they have quite a
Kansas
basketball
had much
history.
better. Yeah, they
Right.
had basketball long before. The Midwest did better than either coast.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but it was really slow.
Yeah.
One of the things, Janet, that you're saying that points out to me is that here's one location, here's one place where women enjoy full rights to their own bodies, to their own medical care. and that when you look elsewhere, that wasn't true. I think we see some of the same kind of disparities within medical care in the country. Like, where can you go to be considered worthy of treatment as a full human being, whether that's on the basketball court or in the doctor's office? I wonder how some of these conversations do cross over into larger conversations that the nation is having. Or do you even think about that, Lucy, when you're writing, or is it just you're focusing on trying to get the story down, and if indeed it has some larger purpose?
Oh, no. I completely think about the larger questions all the time. I mean, one of my dearest hopes, when I finally realized that I wanted to write this novel as a young adult novel, it was because I wanted to have these conversations with young women. I have several young friends in my life who are 17, and we hang out, they'll be over, and their view of feminism and gender justice is different than mine has been. And I've wanted to listen, and I've also been aware, and that's been really important, and they've changed my views on several things. But I'm also aware that even now, with women's studies departments and classes, a lot of young women don't know the history. And I mean, I remember Gloria Steinem talking about that way back when. One of the problems is that we have to, because our history isn't taught, every generation has to learn everything over and over and over again and go through these steps of activism. So for instance, I'm doing a lot of events right now with young women, 17-year-olds who were my age when this happened. And many of them have never heard of Title IX. And so how can they use Title IX, and it is being used a lot more now around issues of sexual harassment and sexual assault, but how can they use that law to get their rights if they don't even know it exists? So I'm wanting to share this history so that, and for specific things like that, but also, I know we want to talk about hope and sharing how, for me, this naive kid, it was just a matter of taking these little steps, finding little places where you can speak, whether it's to your friends or to a school board or to your parents, or, finding little steps to take. And to me, that's where the hope comes in, and talking to young people about that. And I'm also feeling so inspired because they're taking a lot of big steps too. A lot of these walkouts are happening in all the high schools around the country around sexual assault and harassment issues. And seeing these young 17-year-olds organizing these walkouts to demand their rights to harassment-free education. So it's, I've been really aware that I've wanted to have those conversations that get bigger than just basketball. It's not, it's funny, when I did this event 2 nights ago, a few nights ago with Tara Vanderveer, she said all these wonderful things. At the end, she said something like, well, all I really want to do is just coach basketball. And I thought, yes, but exactly, that's just it. I mean, basketball can teach so much about leadership and working together and speaking up and finding strength, because our physical strength morphs right into our psychic, our political strength and our spiritual strength and ways to speak out. So
yeah, when we were talking too earlier about the two kinds of necessary hope, the war informed, long suffering hope of the person who's been long in the fight, and then the young naive hope that gives energy to that other hope and purpose to that other hope too.
Yeah, I know I shared with you, Mary, and some other people, Gloria Steinem's comments, and she's now in her late 80s, is that right? I think so. Mm-hmm. About the Roe v. Wade decision. And I just love her, and it gives me hope too, because she has that older person's historical perspective. She's like, this is nothing new. It's like, this is nothing new. This is patriarchy. We've been fighting it for forever. So this is another step. But she was kind of just relaxed about it. Like, of course they're trying to tear it down. We knew that. And that gives me hope and helps me a lot, just to see that perspective rather than, oh my God, everything's lost, which is how I was feeling,
Yeah. And Gloria Steinem, I spent 3 weeks with her up in Hedgebrook, which is a women's writing retreat. And one night someone asked, well, who are you going to pass the torch to? And she said, well, I'm not. I'm going to light one. And that person is going to light one.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon, if you can imagine a room full of light
Yeah.
with many torches lit by the one at the top, the front. So she rejects this kind of top-down model of leadership. Yes, the voice has to be there, but the voice is not for herself. The voice is only for the people that it serves. And that gives me hope. If someone of that stature says that. Now, in this book, so you've had, I don't know, it might be putting you on the spot with this section, but there's a section in this book where the football coach, you've been accosted by the basketball coach, you've been pushed aside by the boys have pushed you out of the gym, and then the football coach comes. Do you know where that is in that book? Would you
Yes.
mind reading that section?
I'm happy to share that. Yeah. Yeah, so I in the beginning of the story I told you, where I'm, getting accosted and threatened by the boys basketball coach. The boys basketball coach, I had my good friend who was on the boys team, and so I got information about what the coach was saying. He told the team to, spread disparaging rumors about me. I mean, it's really pretty intense. So in the midst of this intense time when things weren't looking well for me. Personally in the high school, these letters were flying around the city. I'd been confronted by several coaches, and this happens. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, they do. I'm leaving the admin offices, trying to figure out how I'll explain my tardiness to Mr. Murray. And here in the empty hallway, plodding slowly my way, comes Mr. Stanton, AKA Coach Stanton, the head football coach. His eyes are pinned on me. I'm completely alone with him. I glance around for an escape route, but see nothing but the long rows of metal lockers on either side of me. Their gray verticality morphs for a second into prison bars, making me think of the suffragettes, how they were thrown in jail for wanting the simple right to vote, how they were manacled to the prison bars, and some were even beaten. I'm only 17 years old, I wanted to scream, leave me alone. As Coach Stanton draws closer, I look straight ahead, as if by not looking at him, I might be able to ward off the attack. When we're side by side, him going in one direction and me in the other, I think maybe I'll get off free. Just keep walking, I tell myself. Just keep breathing. If I can find any oxygen at all in this rank hallway. What's even left for Coach Stanton to say or do? Mr. Voigt and Coach Ward have already taken care of me, the problem of me. I'm toast. I'm a lying dyke. But no, Coach Stanton makes a U-turn, slings an arm across my shoulders, and walks wordlessly with me down the hall. Physically, I'm about to collapse under his big arm. Mentally, his total silence wrecks me. I want to scream, you won, okay? You won, get off of me. After about 30 yards of this side-by-side promenade with me aiming for the exit to the outside, where with any luck I'll be able to breathe and walk freely, he says, did you say hi to your brothers for me? I remember he had asked me to do that a long time ago on the day this all began. He presses. Yes, I mean, I haven't talked to him in a while, but I will. Good, he says. I hope they're doing well. I nod, then squeak out, yeah, they are. Glad to hear it. Summer plans? Me or my brothers? You. I have a job, I say, with the county parks. Excellent, he says. We pace another 5 yards, and then he gives me a squeeze with the arm that's still around my shoulders. I could swear it's a friendly rather than a hostile squeeze. When I look at him, his watery blue eyes are kind. He steps back and says, I'm with you all the way, girl.
I have to say, when I was that section, I was ready to be so mad. I was just ready to be furious at this guy, and then hope.
Well, and he is an ally throughout the rest of the story. Yeah. And this is one thing I share with young people when I'm talking with them in terms of hope and how to proceed. Look for the allies. There are always allies. And he was the least one. I mean, that football coach of all people, and he looked the part. He's a big rotund guy with beefy red face and a crew cut, and he's the least person I would think would be an ally, and he was beyond an ally. So yeah, that is, and from there some other things turned and became more hopeful. So yeah.
What role do you think anger has in hope? Sometimes I think it can be debilitating, but is it a useful thing? I'm putting a
Oh, we lost your voice, Mary.
Sorry, I'm putting a quote in the chat now by Madeline Lingle from A Wrinkle in Time. And I came across this week. It said, "Stay angry, little medic," said Miss Wetsit Whitspur. "You will need all your anger now." And I've always been kind of conflicted about the use of anger. It seems to be the modus operandi of the other side, if there's an other side. And I wonder if you find it invigorating and useful, and if so, how? How do we use the anger rather than succumbing to it?
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab at that. Maybe Jeneth has an idea. I feel a lot of rage a lot, and I can't say I find it useful, but I like that idea. I'm going to think about that some more because I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's energizing. I'm just going to have to think about that because I usually think it's debilitating and I get mad at myself for feeling rage and think, set that aside and find the constructive thing I can do. Look for the allies, spend my time connecting to the people who are moving forward with love instead of being obstacles is what I usually talk to myself. But I like that idea actually. So I don't know. Does someone else want to address that?
And anyone else too, Jeneth, and then let's hear from, if we're going to talk about cultivating hope, let's see what other minds in the room have to say too. Jeneth.
So I think this is a really interesting topic because I think about coaching sport as like a binary thing, the old school versus what I do now. And in the old days, we used to be in huddles. We would get really angry. We would victimize our opponents. Our opponents one time came with grapefruit stuffed in their bras to make fun of us. And this sort of stuff was just part of the rivalry. And then the more I played, and we had a transition my senior year, instead of having that huddle before matches, we started dancing and we started playing all kinds of music and we had our dance moves. And it was like, whatever happens in the dance room stays in the dance room. The coaches weren't allowed. Nobody got to get in the beat. Sometimes other teams would be dancing with us. And we used that kind of movement and that kind of expulsion of anxious energy to prepare ourselves for the games rather than vilifying our opponents and going, they're effing biatches, they're this, that, we just got rid of that whole look. It's not war. It's not like you have to have some kind of, fake news about what they are. It's healthy competition. And so I think that's just a healthier way of doing it. I totally get Madeline Langle though, because so many women weren't able to use their voices. They were afraid. And so sometimes anger is a way to pass through fear. If you're mad enough, the fear takes a back seat and you move forward and you do what you need to do. Personally, I'd rather dance.
And I think a lot of the young women on the collegiate level now in basketball are much more connected because of this whole, there's all this club ball and everybody's been playing with each other since they were very young. I think there is a really healthy approach to competition. They know so many of the people they're competing about and know them very well. And I think partly too, that's from the leadership of some of the amazing coaches like Tara Vanderveer, like Dawn Staley, who really coach from that place of this being a sisterhood and everybody is rising together by playing the very best basketball they can in the moment, but it's not a war.
We had that too. So I played for St. Mary's College and really only had that opportunity because of Tara and the women who come before. My mom organized a basketball team in the 1960s in Colusa, California. And they were called GAA, G-A-A, Girls Athletic Association. And they had to wear their own PE shorts and they had no coach and they had no facilities, but they had a ball and they had a bat and they had almost half the population of that ranching community going out after school and playing. And yet it made her very angry not to have the same rights and not to even have any hope for the same rights because there was no law put in place to make equity enforceable. It was the pleasure of whoever was in charge. But she too would talk about what motivated her most was not the anger, but the joy of playing. the joy of moving your body. Now, this was a kid who grew up slinging hay bales out of door. You know, she was a strong woman. She had more strength than a lot of the town boys who didn't have that kind of physical activity. But even so, it was that shared experience on the court that motivated her and gave anger. Anger wasn't, like Jenna said, anger was the first step, but it wasn't the last. It was a doorway through which she could find a voice. Oh, Karen says we called it GAA. Oh yeah, only a handful of girls participated. Karen, you were a swimmer, weren't you?
Actually, I was 6 foot tall, almost 6'1", maybe at that time, and I didn't do sports. I should have done. I did a little bit through 7th and 8th grade. You know, one time I remember substituting in basketball. I loved it, but I missed out completely. I ended up doing a little bit of student government. I was in clubs. As my husband said, I called myself a tall freak, you know, because there was no value in being tall in those days. Mm-hmm. And then forward, my daughter, my two daughters, same stature. One daughter ended up swimming. She's a swimmer. And she had extra long, even longer arms than I do. And she played water polo. And because the coach moved her over to be the goalie. He was in with all the girls, you know, happy to be part of the team. And he said, why do I have to go over to the diving pool and practice by myself? And anyway, she ended up being the goalie, and they won the whole North Coast with her. She played every game, all 8 games, and it helped get her into college. Awesome. She doesn't think so, but she ended up going to Scripps College for Women in LA. And when she went down to interview with her dad, he was going along quietly, and he says, tell him about water polo. You know, what happened?
No. Tell her about winning the North Coast.
Oh, yeah. Mention that you won the North Coast and that you were the goalie for all 8 games or whatever, all the games. And they go, oh, and they got really interested, you know.
And the coach cut it short and said, I have to walk over to the admissions office.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
So the coach immediately wanted to go. And I mean, she was perfect, but she was very modest. But anyway, it was just like night and day. And the last part of the story is my mom was born in 1918. And I think they had some sports, but she had to go out for debate in order to get a letter. She and her best friend wanted a letter, and they didn't have letters for girls. So by getting into debate, they each earned a letter, which she did in college, you know, it helped her. But we can see so much of the results of our daughter's sports. I mean,
it changed them.
It changed her completely. She did Girl Scouts and other things too, but that was, and she did swimming as well as the water polo, but she played all 4 years in college, you know, and it's a huge thing. She's a major breadwinner in her family right now. but her husband, you guys know this, her husband wrote a movie that was nominated for an Oscar. So she says she doesn't mind supporting the arts. But anyway, but no, it changed. And then her sister had food allergies and was not quite as coordinated, but she's sort of a lifelong athlete. She rides bikes and, you know, knows how to do mechanical things. You know, anyway, the sports, physical activity is important for her too. And then little brother got into college on volleyball. Anyway, they had,
Thank you.
not too much, but anyway, they had really good educations from Miramani because very pressure, you know, you really get like a private education, but they didn't have straight A's, so they couldn't have gotten into the schools without the sports. That's another topic. So then when he got down to UC San Diego, he got great grades, you know. Anyway, well, that's another story. Anyway, thank you. I'll shut up.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was huge.
So on the terms of just opportunity, we keep going back to the opportunities that sport gives women, not just kind of to exercise your activist muscles, but also to inhabit your own body in a way that I think a lot of people who don't do sports or don't dance, don't understand. When someone walks into my classroom who's a dancer or an athlete, male or female, I can tell, especially in the women, in the way in which they sit in the chair and they take up space. They don't just, they sit in a space. And I wonder too if that translates to our political moment, where the women are finally now taking up more space. They're taking up more offices. They're running for more offices. I don't know if there's a carryover from Title IX's impact on the athletic field to the political realm? I don't know.
I think there is. And what I've been thinking about a lot lately is a lot of people talk about the two paths that the Title IX actions have taken, and one is in the sports arena and the other is with the sexual harassment arena, which is being used for probably more now, the law, than it is in sports equity. But I feel like the two are very deeply connected, and I haven't heard enough people talk about that. It's what you just said, Mary, when someone walks into a room and you know they're an athlete because they are taking up space. And I feel like, and I've asked some of the young women who I've been talking with, has your experience playing team sports, being an athlete and being on a team, so both learning your own personal strength and having a sisterhood, helped you cope with issues of sexual harassment, which are unfortunately rampant in high schools right now. Things have not gotten better. They've probably gotten worse. And I think it does. I know for me as a kid, just finding my voice through sports. I mean, even my writing voice somehow came out of that, getting to know my body, in that sort of intricate way that athletes do, where you understand yourself almost cell by cell. So I think there's a really deep connection between the two.
Anyone from the audience have any questions or any stories from their own athletic pasts or unathletic pasts? Fandom is equally interesting to me. I think Joan and Jen, Joni and Jen.
Hi there. I'm Joan Lohman. This is my partner, Jen.
Welcome.
We are huge women's basketball fans. I could tell a lot of stories. I was sports writing editor of my high school in 1962. In that era, they had something called the San Joaquin Valley Scholastic Press Association Sports Writing Contest. You were in a room with maybe 50 boys and me. You were given some copy, and then you were told to write a story. And I won 3 years in a row, much to the chagrin of the young men in the room. So that's kind of the beginning of my sports thing. But currently, I've just had a knee replacement, and I planned my surgery around March Madness so that I can watch every game of college women's basketball. So that's kind of the level of my mental participation in sports. Jen and I went to the opening game of the ABL. We went to many, many Sacramento Monarchs games and saw the championship. And here's my Yo Bear from that era, Yolanda Griffith, Teddy. So we've bought 3 copies of the book so far for our many great nieces. And I guess what I want to think about is just my incredible gratitude for the legacy of Title IX and knowing about it myself personally and just feeling it out, how much it's empowered women in the many places that we haven't yet evolved, but the great foundation that is. I'm thinking a couple things right now. We're trying to get a WNBA team into Oakland. I don't know if
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yes.
I spoke at a press conference. I don't know if any of you were at the press conference at the Alana Beard was introduced as the probably owner of the new, what I'm thinking of as the Oakland Amazons. And if anyone on the call around this thing is interested in becoming part of a kind of a ad hoc group to be working toward that end, the momentum is there, and it would be so fabulous for the Bay Area to have its own, finally, professional women's team. So that's one thing. And the other thing I've just came to me was, if Kevin Durant were in Russia right now under lock and key for having supposedly a little cannabis in his suitcase, would his case have been treated the same as Brittany Griner? It's just, I'm so amazed that there hasn't been more governmental intervention, and that's just an immediate issue. But this conversation, hearing about especially the first women to get the scholarships and just the whole era. I grew up in the, three bounces on your side of the court era. And I had my first coaching when I was 40, and I finally learned how to do a pick and roll, which was very exciting. And now mostly I watch. I do have a hoop in my driveway, but it's been neglected for a while.
And the women's teams in San Diego. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, have you all heard probably you know about this, there's a senior women's team in San Diego that you have to be, I think, 70 or 80 to even qualify on it.
That's fantastic.
Some good
I'm not
video
gonna
of them
go to San
playing.
Diego, but maybe if once we get the WNBA established in Oakland, maybe we'll get an elder women's basketball thing, and I'll have a new life with my new knee.
All the people that never got to see it, right? Yeah.
So I would love to connect and hear more about what's happening with the WNBA team in Oakland. So I'll maybe get your contact stuff from Mary.
Yeah, me too.
I'll put my email address in the chat.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I was at that ABL game with Jennifer Azzi was playing, and I have a jersey signed by Jennifer Azzi.
Oh,
I just about to go to college.
Blinded by the light.
Yeah, and I worked for the March.
singing America and May all with sisterhood. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Crown thy good with sisterhood, so
Yeah.
we can all be
Yeah.
great.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And I worked for the Monarchs for 4 years in college as a glorified water girl, just because I got tickets to see the games. So I don't know. Go Oakland. You know,
Yeah, go
this is a
Oakland.
literary event, but go Oakland.
Mary, they did just transfer her case over to the different department under the president. And all the basketball teams are putting decals on their court. I just read in the paper of their
Yes.
initials. So it's finally
I
after.
mean, the hope is that they've been quiet about it because that's the strategic thing to do. It's, you know, I mean, I hear you, and I just, yeah, there's a couple, you know, Marines over there too who haven't gotten out. So they just got one out. So I'm hoping that's some sort of pre-step and getting BG out. I don't know, but it's devastating thinking of her being over there in that country that's racist and homophobic and
Yeah.
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. And anti-feminist too, probably. I mean,
Absolutely,
I mean, too, what worries.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? We have about 5 more minutes. And we could talk about a whole variety of things, but
You didn't mind.
we'll see what comes up.
I have a question for Lucy. You talked about explaining why you chose to write your story as fiction instead of memoir, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, it was a really hard decision. I think it's one reason why it took me so long to write this story, because I felt like I should tell it as nonfiction. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it really has a trajectory that's pretty cool. But I realized I am a fiction writer mainly, and I felt like I could plumb the heart of the story better as in fiction. If I wrote it as nonfiction, there'd be a lot of testifying down at the legislature and to school boards, and a lot of talking. I just felt like I can get to the heart of the story, and I always want my stories to carry the readers. I love to offer new ideas, and I also want it to be an emotional journey. That and I love writing dialogue, and to me that carries a story. And you know, honestly, who can really remember dialogue from 50 years ago? Part of it is it's just the kind of writer I am. A lot of people are writing nonfiction these days, calling it nonfiction, and they'll tell you that they can't remember the dialogue, of course, and the characters are composites, of course, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. To me, that's fiction, so I'm going to call it fiction. What else? There were several. I also wanted to protect the privacy of some of the other players on my team. So I fictionalized, there's the primary character who is basically me in my experience. And the adults are all based on pretty much one-on-one correspondence to real people. But some of the other kid characters are fictional. I didn't want to tell the stories of other, there's a character, anyway, I won't give anything away, but there's some traumatic stuff that happens to some other characters, and I didn't want to reveal real people, so I disguised all that. And I pulled in a couple stories from a year or so, my first year in college I got to play basketball in college, and pulled some of those stories in. So those are a lot of reasons, but.
Could some of the mothers of sons make a comment or two, Mary?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if Elizabeth or you or.
Oh, you mean? I was about,
Elizabeth and, you know.
well, I coach my son's basketball team. And when they go out and they see, my assistant coach was a 6'6" dad. And when the refs would come into the room with the ball, they'd go straight to him. And they'd say, okay, what, and he would say, no, she's the coach. And the boys had no question, they had no notion that I was the head coach. That was always how it was, to have that in their heads and not even be a question is, I think, a kind of progress. Now, I do hope to coach the women, but I also think that boys need to see women in those positions as natural, which they are, before the culture shifts and changes.
Yeah, and close family friends of ours have a 21-year-old son, and he probably follows women's teams more than he follows men's teams. And it's not like something he's making a point of doing. He's just like, he follows, women's college basketball teams, knows all the players and can talk about it as fluently as he can about the men's players. So I love that.
And there's a man named David Barry. You can follow him on Twitter, and he has a lot of wonderful statistics. He's a sports economist, but he looks specifically at women's sports and media presentation of women. And he says that it's followed up by the research too, that the inequalities are vast because of they're not exposed. Exposure reverses inequalities much, much faster than laws can. And then the laws can follow. But if I can find it, I'll put it in there in the chat. But
a perfect example of that is the Sedona Prince video. For those of you who aren't aware, a year and a half ago at the NCAA tournaments, the men's and women's happened to take place at the same time in the same place. Well, not happened partly because of COVID. And this woman who played, I believe, for Oregon, took a video of the men's weight room, which was vast. I mean, a huge room full of dozens of pieces of equipment. And the women's so-called room, which was literally one small piece of equipment. And that really changed a lot, or made things happen, by just showing that picture, just like Mary said, just like bringing it to everyone's view.
How do women's sports help young men? Does Elizabeth have any comments? I'm trying to get Elizabeth.
I have one statement about that. Title IX, which is often they think, oh, it's going to take opportunities away from men. Well, this last year, they were going to cut one of the Big Ten men's track teams. And they said, well, if we do that, then men are going to have fewer opportunities than women. So they took it to court. And under Title IX at that school, I can't remember which one at the moment, they won the right to keep that team going because of equity. So equity is not for or against men. Equity is something that is to be desired by all because it's protecting all. And I think it has been misperceived as an attack against men's sports. And really that's where the anger comes from. And that's just not, there's just as many opportunities for my son to play more than there has ever been before. And there are more opportunities also now for women to play. Anything else before? I teach a class on women on sports fiction. And actually Lucy came and spoke to that class. So we get really deep in the weeds on some of these wonderful issues. But I want to thank Lucy and Jeneth for coming today and speaking so beautifully. And I really do recommend this book. It's YA, but it's great for women and boys of any age. I'm going to give it to my nephew who's 13, he's reading everything, but he's going to love it. You can get it at any bookstore. If you get it at your local or at bookshop.org, please do review it on Amazon.com and on Goodreads. You do not have to buy it on those places to take advantage of their algorithm. We need word out about these great books that may not otherwise find the wide audience that they need to find. And I'm also going to put here in the chat word of our next reading, which is on June 12th. And it features Tiff Dresden and Rachel Moritz, and we're going to be celebrating Pride Month, which is a big deal here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Rachel comes from the Midwest up in Wisconsin. I think she's up in that area, but wonderful poet. And we'll have plenty of time to celebrate them as well. Say again, Elizabeth?
She's in Minneapolis.
Oh, it's all the same, right? That's the probably justified complaint against us coasters. But thanks again to Lucy, thanks to Jenna, and you're welcome to stick around. If you hear the boys in the next room, those are my boys in the next room doing, I don't know what, it's loud. But thank you. Give a virtual or a real round of applause.
Thank you all for coming out and talking on this Sunday afternoon. I really enjoyed hearing all your thoughts.
Thank you, Lucy.
I want to get your book for my women's club, for my book club, for book group. I'm so tired of reading adult books.
Karen, there's a bunch of books that are in the books right now, and they're ordering more. They just got 3, so there'll be a full.
Oh, and Joan, I'll contact you about the WNBA thing. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm trying to find my. There it is.